In this lab, your manager is asking you to secure the Cisco switch and router per company policy. The policy states 1. That the iOS must be prevented from attempting to resolve mistyped commands to domain names. 2. The host name of the switches should be SW device number underscore model number, and the host name of routers should be R device number underscore model number. 3. The console and VTY sessions should close after 7 minutes. 4. Routers need to have a block for anyone that fails to log in after 4 attempts within a 2-minute period. The block should last for 3 minutes. 5. There should be a strong 10-character password for the privileged exec mode. 6. There should be a strong 10-character password for the console and VTY lines. 7. The network devices need to have their unused ports disabled. 8. The network devices need a MOTD banner that reads unauthorized use of this device is strictly prohibited. 9. CDP should not be enabled on the network devices. 10. Switches need to have an IP assigned to a VLAN ID to allow management to remote into the switch. And 11. All plain text passwords should be encrypted in configuration files. Seems like a lot, right? Seems a bit overwhelming. That's why we're going to break this down into manageable steps. First, let's verify the information we have from management matches what's on these PCs. Make note of anything that doesn't match the work documentation and update the configurations to match what management has in the IP addressing chart. Pause here to do so. Now let's use PC1 and console into the switch with a console cable. Then select the terminal desktop app and access the switch. So for the switch, let's start with instruction number 1. Prevent iOS from attempting to resolve mistyped commands to domain names. So first off, what does our manager mean by that? If you type in a command into the router or switch and it's incorrect or invalid, the network device will think it's a host name and try to find its corresponding IP address. That wastes time. And the only way to abort the name lookup is by pressing Ctrl-Shift-6. So we're just going to shut that feature off. To do so, we'll need to go into privileged exec mode with the enable command, then global configuration mode with the configure terminal command. Now we'll use the no IP domain -lookup command to shut off that setting. Next, let's put in the host name of the device, which should be SW device number underscore model number. So in this case, it's host name SW1 underscore 2960. Let's make a note of all these changes we're making in the work documentation paper so you can write a narrative on what we're doing afterwards. Next, we have the policy of making sure the console and VTY sessions close after 7 minutes. But what does this mean? It means we want to make sure a user gets timed out of the default user exec mode if they don't input anything after 7 minutes. Why? It prevents someone from leaving a console or virtual line open when they walk away from the session. Preventing the open session stops a hacker from waiting for the user to leave and then using the open session to change configurations. So let's now input that command. We'll need to do it for the console and virtual lines. Let's start with the console. Line console 0, exec timeout 7-0. The line console 0 command simply means to configure the console line. Exec timeout means to time out the user exec mode. The 7 means to time out in 7 minutes. And the 0 means 0 seconds. So the line means time out the user exec mode in 7 minutes 0 seconds on the console line. Now we need to do the same thing for the virtual lines that are used for Telnet and SSH. So we'll configure line VTY 0 through 15 to cover all the virtual lines. Then we'll type in the same exec timeout 7-0 command. Policy 4 is about routers, so we can skip that one for now. The next policy states that there should be a strong 10-character password for privileged exec mode. If we look at our work documentation, they mention that the privileged exec passwords should be inner tech. To enable the secret password, we have to be in global configuration mode and input enable secret inner tech. So enable secret means encrypting the password needed to access privileged exec mode, which we type enable on the device's terminal to access. This prevents accessing privileged exec mode without the password, blocking attackers from running privileged commands. Policy 6 states that there should be a strong 10-character password for the console line, and VTY lines should use the local count to authenticate. By setting a console and VTY line password, we'll restrict access to someone trying to use a console cable to connect their laptop to the device to configure it. These passwords will also restrict unauthorized users from remoting into the device with Telnet or SSH. The passwords we should use was provided by management in the documentation workpaper. The password should be IT Warrior according to management. So let's put in the commands line console 0 password IT Warrior. Log in. And then for the VTY lines, we don't want to create a separate password, but instead use the local accounts username and password. So for this one, we'll use the command line VTY 015 login local. Policy 7 states that we should shut down unused ports. Let's do a show IP int brief command to see all the interfaces on the switch. Make note of all the interfaces that are down. That means the interfaces have nothing connected to them. Those are the interfaces we'll want to shut down. Why would we want to do this? To prevent anyone from just plugging into a jack port that may connect a patch panel to one of our switch ports. If we left them open, a hacker could plug in their laptop to an open port and get connected into our network where they could then continue to run tools to get into the servers or other computers on the network. Essentially, less active ports shrinks the attack surface that could be exploited by a hacker. The next policy states we should place a MOTD banner that reads unauthorized use of this device is strictly prohibited. What is a MOTD banner? A MOTD banner, or message of the day banner, is a message that is displayed as soon as a user logs into the system. It's used to display a legal notice or warning about unauthorized access to the device. That way, if someone logs into the device, they can't say they weren't told not to access it. So, how do we create the MOTD banner our manager wanted us to create? Simple. From global configuration mode, use the command banner MOTD unauthorized use of this device is strictly prohibited. Okay, great. Remember to continue to update your notes with what you're changing each time. You should now have a line in your notes about updating the banner MOTD with unauthorized use of this device is strictly prohibited. Policy 9 is to disable CDP. Before we shut it off, let's see what it does. If we use the show CDP neighbors command, we can see what port our switch is using to connect to our router. Cisco Discovery Protocol is what allows us to see the other Cisco devices that have CDP enabled and are connected to the device we're consoled into. In this case, our switch G01 interface, which is the local interface since we're in the switch, is connected to router 1's G00 interface. Our policy wants us to disable it, so if someone did manage to get into our switch, they wouldn't know what other devices are connected. To disable CDP, just use the no CDP run command. The last policy states that switches are to have an IP assigned to a VLAN ID to allow management to remote into the switch. According to management's IP chart, the VLAN ID that should be assigned an IP on the switch is VLAN 1. The IP address and subnet to be assigned are 172.16.1.2, 255.255.255.0. For this, we need to jump into the VLAN ID configuration by using the command int VLAN1. Then we need to assign the IP address and subnet. IP address 172.16.1.2, 255.255.255.0. And make sure you put in no shut to make sure the interface is enabled. Policy 10 is to encrypt all the passwords, as some passwords were not encrypted. We can see they weren't using the show run command. To make sure that all passwords are encrypted in the configuration files, we need to enter the command service password-encryption in global configuration mode. Now, if you do another show running configuration command, you'll see that the configuration now displays our command and the password has been encrypted. Remember to save the switch configuration with the write command, WR. Now that we assign that management IP, let's try remoting into the switch since management had already set up the SSH configurations. Put in the connection type as SSH. Put in 172.16.1.2 as the IP address. And then put in ITW-admin as the username. Can you connect? Awesome. Now save the packet tracer. In your Google Word doc, use your notes to write out a narrative of what you've done to complete this project. For example, I connected to PC1 and PC2 to confirm that the IP addresses match the ones provided to me by my manager. PC1's IP subnet and gateway information were missing, so I added the information to match the IP addressing chart. I also corrected the blank information from blank to blank on the blank device, etc. This will teach you how to be very detailed in solving issues and will also help you to teach what you've done, which will reinforce the information. Once completed, move on to part 2 where we'll secure the router next. Do not submit the lab until part 2 is complete since we'll be using the same packet tracer file you're using now. See you in the next lab.